Hi there. Let's talk about decision making. I'm talking specifically about the sort of decision where we've got to weigh one option against the other. They can both seem quite attractive or they can both seem quite daunting, but sometimes it's really difficult to distinguish or disseminate one from the other. As a start point for this, I'm going to use the very excellent movie Castaway, starring Tom Hanks as systems engineer Chuck Noland. Now, in the film, Chuck is presented with a really serious dilemma after he's marooned on a desert island following a plane crash. He develops some survival skills, he learns to adapt to his environment, but he also wants more than anything else to get away. So he's got two stark choices. He can sit tight, rely on what he's gained in terms of knowledge to keep himself alive until he's rescued, if anyone's coming for him. Or option two, he can take his chances out in the open ocean, build a raft, head out there, hope to reach one of the shipping lanes. He's in the middle of the Pacific. It's a long, long way from anywhere. This is a serious dilemma. Now, we've all encountered serious dilemmas, and one way to solve them, the sort of classical way, if you like, is to take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and put pros on one side and cons on the other, and somehow make a sort of visual representation in which we can weigh one side against the other. Now, the danger or the difficulty with that is that it can involve quite a bit of deductive reasoning. We, after all, are generating the reasons, and it's very possible that we can steer ourselves subconsciously down a particular path, and as human beings, we naturally seek safety, and this is usually where this takes us. After a while, we can realise that what we've actually done is realise that the smart choice right now is to sit tight, keep our heads down, or gather more information, sift a few more options, or wait for the time to be right. Now, if you're watching this during the COVID-19 pandemic, you might be doing just that at the moment. But I'm going to talk about how we can actually take this opportunity or use this time to go after the things we want, how we can give ourselves permission and recognise our entitlement and not sit tight, keep our heads down, and wait for it all to be over. One of the other big difficulties that we've got with a pros and cons list, especially where we're looking at sort of qualitative decisions, is that these things just don't break down into numerical units that we can actually empirically measure one against the other. There's no such thing as a unit of should I leave my job and start my own business. There's no such thing as a unit of is this relationship working out and is it time to move on, and yet we adopt this sort of strategic empirical approach to making these sort of decisions. It's often rather ineffective. So let's for a moment go back to Chuck Noland. This is a serious dilemma for him. Stay put and await rescue, make whatever preparations he can to sort of attract attention, or with his raft made of sort of wood and hemp rope, set out into the ocean. And here's the interesting thing for me about this movie, in that this may appear to be a very serious dilemma, but not for Chuck Noland. And there are a couple of really good reasons why we don't see him angsting over which of these two options to make. He doesn't make a pros and cons list sketched out in the sand with a stick. Two reasons for this. Firstly, there's Kelly. Kelly is his other half. He loves Kelly, and everything about him is all about getting back to her. He just wants them to be together. It's actually, obviously, it's Tom Hanks' movie. He's a brilliant actor. It's very moving. The sort of pain he goes through from being separated from her. He's going back to her. That's part of this big decision, or that's rather one of the reasons why this isn't a tremendously difficult decision for him. The other is who he is. Chuck Noland is a systems engineer. That is his speciality. Working at FedEx is time management or time and motion studies. His job is to maximize the efficiency of the people who work in the organization, and he is passionate about that. There's a moment in the film where he says, the greatest sin of all is to turn your back on time. We never allow that to happen. So this is a guy who isn't going to sit tight, keep his head down, have a nice cold pint and wait for it all to blow over. There's no way he can do that. Now, these two things are at the absolute very core of his being. His love for Kelly and his desire to keep moving and make a difference and to be that sort of agent of change in his own life. So That's great. What can we take from that? Well, I'd like to advert you to the work of Professor Ruth Chang. I'm going to give a link in the description below to her TED Talk on values-based judgments. Now, if we have a set of values that we're welded to, then we can use those to actually isolate some goals for ourselves. But we've got to know who we are first. Chuck is in no doubt about who he is, so he doesn't experience any dilemma when it's like, should I stay? Should I head out into the ocean? That decision's already made. He's not weighing pros and cons. He's not going to be swayed by any other external factors, and we can be the same. If we know who we are, and more specifically, and let's be really honest here, because we're allowed to be, what do you want? What do you stand for? What do you feel entitled to? And what will you no longer put up with? These things like them can be the actual core of your values once you've taken the time to nail them down. From that, we can actually start to isolate a few goals. So if I'm not going to put up with sitting tight and waiting for COVID to be over, what can I do instead? What options are open to me as a result of that? How can I actually take control of this situation, and what do I need to do in order to make that happen? If I believe that I'm entitled to something, and if you've been to any of my meetups or any of my clients will tell you that at the absolute core of all the personal development work I do is the idea of entitlement. You are entitled to be happy and fulfilled. If you keep sight of that, you'll find making the goals that you need to isolate a whole lot easier. Now, Ruth Chang, in her excellent TED Talk, talks about the idea of she talks about this idea that decisions of this sort can't be nailed down into empirical units, and she describes a situation. What is effectively a really hard choice is usually between two options that are actually on a par, as she calls it. That is, they can't be separated simply by sifting the information. But if we know what we stand for, if we know who we are, what we won't accept, what we absolutely goddamn feel entitled to, then that decision becomes a whole bunch easier, and we know absolutely where we are. So let me give you an example. Let's suppose you've set yourself the goal during COVID, let's make it relevant, of developing yourself, of seeking out new challenges and taking on new things that are actually going to develop you as a person. Yes, those things might turn out to be difficult, but you can see that on the other side of this, you're going to walk out of it as a better, more rounded, stronger person. So this is your goal. And then in the same week, you get offered a promotion at work and see an advertisement for volunteers needed to work on a youth project with disadvantaged kids. Now, I've done that myself. I can tell you that is challenging in no uncertain terms. But then we've got this dilemma, because the new job's going to come with some additional hours as well as some very welcome additional money, and that's going to sort of preclude doing those extra evening sessions. If we actually know who we are, if we know what our values are, and we've made a commitment to that based on what we actually believe, then that dilemma is going to become a little bit easier to navigate. Now, we can't build a value for ourselves of wanting a bigger house in the country and a whole bunch more money. These have to be values about you. The goal can be that, yeah, absolutely, but you need to nail down what's actually at the core of your belief system. Who are the most important people in your life that you really want to show up for? What sort of person do you want to be when you walk out the other side of COVID? How do you want to reflect on the time that we've spent in and out of lockdown over the last few months? Do you want to be able to say, yeah, you know what, I did what I could with that. I made the best possible use of it under some difficult circumstances. Or do we want to be sort of looking back on this and saying, yeah, you know, we just waited for it all to blow over. We waited for the sort of circumstances to be a bit more sort of appropriate, a little bit more right. I would like to talk to you about this if this is something you're interested in making these values-based judgments as opposed to the sort of pros and cons. And we're not just talking about pros and cons. We're surrounded by competing information all the time. You can make a decision over a particular course of action, and the next thing you scroll on your Facebook timeline is some very authoritative and composed and expert looking person saying that actually the way to do it is this. If we know what our values are, we're not going to be waylaid by that. We're going to move straight on. We're going to be able to sweep aside those nagging little doubts, those other voices that are saying, are you sure that's really the best course of action? Because we're going to know who we are and what it is we want. Now, I can't tell you what that is. That's something that you can work out for yourself, or you can use my contact details, which are down below. Our first session's always free, and we can talk about it. There's last thing I'm going to say, a bit in another excellent movie, The Matrix, where Morpheus makes a very sort of impressive speech, and he tells Neo that there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path, which sounds very noble at the time, but if we're going to extend that metaphor a little bit further, we can find ourselves going only a short distance down that path before we meet someone that says, are you sure you're going the right way? If we want to avoid that, if we want to be able to make those decisions with an absolute clarity, saying, yeah, I'm doing this because this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and this is what I stand for, then let's take a look at your values. And from that, let's make some real goals. My personal goal is to walk out the other side of COVID better, stronger, and more rounded person with some new skills than I walked in. Can I do that? Well, I'm goddamn entitled to it, and I am in no doubt about that. Want to know more? Let's talk. Okay, we'll be talking again soon in another of these videos anyway. Okay, see you later. Bye.